if you're not coaching in all three dimensions, then by very definition, you're not helping your athletes be the best they can be. Now I see the void potentially. And if they don't, you can continue to ask questions. And that's kind of what we encourage athletics directors to do, even in their postseason evals and things like that, is to ask those second and third dimension questions. Because if I ask you, what is your strategy to motivate intrinsically? If you're getting blank stares and really a lot of ums and uhs and no clear strategy, it kind of makes the case for you.
Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Coaching. Excited to welcome Wes Simmons with us today. Wes is the president of the 3D Institute, and I haven't known him long, but been an admirer for a long time. So, Wes, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's really good to be on a podcast with you.
Cool. Well, let's jump in. Just share a little bit about your career trajectory and how you ended up where you're at now.
Well, that's a long question you just asked me, so I'll just try to give you the Cliff Notes version. But yeah, it's been a journey for sure. I was a college student athlete who really didn't have a vision for my life beyond sport, which I know is common. And that's sport becomes so identity forming in your life. It's hard to see your life without it. As an athlete, and so I went into coaching out of college, stayed and got my master's, and did my grad assistantship at Northwest Missouri State. And if I'm honest, it wasn't because I had this great vision to impact the lives of athletes. And I just loved the game. And I was also a beneficiary of a coach who had created an incredible environment where relationships flourish. I didn't really want to leave that. So I went into coaching, because of those reasons. But about 3 years into that journey, a new dream in my heart was born. And I became fascinated really with the internet. This is probably around 2003, 2004, and the opportunity it provided for online education, really. And so I began to see a vision and a dream to create an online professional development platform for coaches clear back then. And the original version of that was called the Coaches Circle. But really for me, the missing ingredient to not only sustain that, my passion for that, was the 3D framework, which I didn't really encounter until about 2009. I always had a vision to help coaches coach beyond just the physical, because I'd experienced that in my own life, right? I had coaches that, were fundamentally sound, but they were also skilled at coaching the mind, and they captured the heart. And that experience, though I didn't have language for it, was part of my passion for trying to replicate that for other athletes. I think every athlete needs to have at least one of those kind of coaches in their life. And so I had a vision for that, but we didn't really have the 3D framework to give shape to that vision until 2009, when I encountered a guy named Dr. Jeff Duke. And Jeff had been teaching this 3D concept at the University of Central Florida. And I was at a coach's clinic where he presented a workshop called Motivating the 21st Century Athlete. And it was really just about how to motivate from within. And I saw all of these coaches that were at the event swarm him afterwards and go, "Man, that's great stuff. How do I get more of that?" And his answer was, "Well, you moved to Orlando and you joined my night class." And so that was the opportunity I had, because I'd already kind of been working in this field, but this was a missing piece to really give shape to the vision I had to train a generation of transformational coaches. And so Jeff and I began working together, and then we formed the 3D Institute officially in 2014, and started taking that framework to the world.
Cool. I'm curious, the curriculum or the stuff you had before you met Jeff, was it similar? What did you change? Tell us about that process.
Yeah. So the 3D framework, first of all, is just that. It's a framework, and people need to understand it not as really a curriculum, even though there is a curriculum. The way we would say that is we have a baseline of training that gives everybody a clarity of purpose, an alignment of effort, a common language, and a shared framework. And so there's a purpose to the curriculum, but kind of zooming it out a little bit, that's minimally what it is a course or a curriculum. But to maximize that, seeing it as a framework that allows you to create an operating system for ongoing professional development or personal development in your own life or in an organization. And so Jeff had the framework. He had basically no content developed out for the first dimension, which, if there's a listener unfamiliar with the 3D framework, the first dimension would consist of things like strength, power, cardiovascular, speed, quickness, agility, tactics, repetition. Those 8 areas. And you could also add things like flexibility in there. But generically, we're talking about the fundamentals, the skill set it takes to be great at not only playing a sport, but coaching sport. And Jeff didn't have a lot developed there, and we still don't, because that's not the focus of what we do. There's a world of resources developed to help athletes get bigger, faster, and stronger, and that's all very sport specific. And so we applied that. We root that on. Go get it. If you're not a good first dimension coach, it's because you're not trying. There's a lot of resources there to help you. What Jeff had a pretty good handle on was the second dimension content. So now we're talking about some resources and training for motivation, confidence, emotions, team cohesion, goal setting. And really his original model also included things like intensity, focus, mental imagery. So, but we settled on those big 5. So I guess that's one change, is we reduced the content down a little bit, because where this really came out of was a grad level master's course that's taught over, a 16 or 18 week semester. And when we started trying to put that into a professional development environment, we thought, okay, let's try to whittle this down and not make everybody an expert in all 3 dimensions and all aspects of the 3D framework, but at least general practitioners. And what are those hot topics, second dimension issues? And we settled on those 5: motivation, confidence, emotions, team cohesion, goal setting. And really, all of that was very solidly based in the research Jeff did in his doctorate. And we've stayed true to that, because, for us to have relevancy, in a professional development world, we've got to stay rooted in what the research shows about what great do. So, but what Jeff's strength always was to not just be a sports psychologist, because that's not who he was or is, but he's a coach. It's applied psychology. So, we've tried to take those principles and really kind of take them off the top shelf of academia and put them on take the cookies off the top shelf and put them on the bottom shelf for coaches at every level to grasp the concept, but then have a practical strategy for how to implement that. And so that was always the strength that Jeff had. And quite frankly, we've had to whittle some of that down, just because there was so much that he had, even beyond what's in there now. But the void we had was really in the third dimension. And that was where my colleague, Mark Hull, stepped in, because he had already been working on a lot of content and a lot of thoughts around those issues of what we call the third dimension: identity, character, significance, self-worth, value. It's that deeper executive center of the being, that place in us that determines our, it's kind of the core of our decision making and the essence of who we are, the spirit, if you will. And Jeff had the framework, but the way he always kind of described it was, the third dimension, that's your journey as the coach. And he'd say that at clinics: that's your journey. The third dimension's about your journey. And I'm sitting there as we're developing all this saying, okay, well, if there's a journey, there's got to be a roadmap for that. And we need to define out the third dimension, just like we did the second and first dimension. And that's where Mark really helped us. And that's where we settled on those 5 topics. And so all of that was kind of added to the original and then brought back in later. Jeff continued to teach this and it got incorporated. But I'd say that was the main differences.
Gotcha. Cool. I've never heard that history behind it. Yeah, that triggered a lot of questions I didn't send you beforehand, so I hope that's okay. So when we're talking third dimension, something we talk about here, and really it started me and then my partner in some of the coaching research we do, a guy named Dustin Gallion, he's our golf coach here, was a basketball coach before where we first met each other, is when you're young and dumb and think you know it all, how do you get by? How as a leader do you get buy-in with folks that when you're young, you think you think you're invincible, think you're going to change the world? Curious to hear your thoughts of, for the young coach just getting into it, how do you capture them and say, hey, here's a framework you should really learn? and you don't know as much as you think you know,
Well, I think that
without sounding condescending like I just sounded.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, I think first of all, as a leader of people that are, you got a large span of different age groups probably on your staff, as most athletic directors would, right? You've got the young coach coming out of college, uh, knows it all that, but then you've got the veteran coach, and they may tend toward that too. But I think that each audience, it's helpful to kind of think of what stage of their life in. I think
Mhm.
that young coach, there's probably not enough life experience to really be dreaming beyond success at that stage. I think that, somewhere around midlife where I'm at, 40, 45 years old, once you're in that second half, your perspective begins to change a little bit towards the impact you want to make and the legacy you want to leave behind, hopefully. But that first half, very much, and I understand that. Especially if you're a competitor and a competitive person, you want to win. You want to be successful, and so I think that part of how you get buy-in is help them see how this kind of approach to leadership will give you what you want, and it's not going to box you in. But now let me help you see beyond that. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of the phase of life you're in. But I think that um, the way to do that is simply by just helping people through questioning to arrive at this conclusion that if you're not leading people in all aspects of who they are, by very definition, you're not going to get their best. And when that light bulb turns on, now there's a value on second or third dimension focus that may not have been there before. Because if all you're thinking is how do I win, then the easy answer to focus on and where you can measure it is that first dimension. But as soon as I can just turn the light of truth on that reality, that if you're not coaching in all three dimensions, then by very definition, you're not helping your athletes be the best they can be. Now I see the void potentially. And if they don't, you can continue to ask questions. And that's kind of what we encourage athletics directors to do, even in their postseason evals and things like that, is to ask those second and third dimension questions. Because if I ask you, what is your strategy to motivate intrinsically? If you're getting blank stares and really a lot of ums and uhs and no clear strategy, it kind of makes the case for you. And so trying to help them see how this, yes, will help you reach your goals, but then not leaving it there, helping them see beyond that to where they know their significance is other people's success. So
Yeah, that's well said. We just had I'm not sure if there's a question at the end of this comment, but it seems like it fits. I was just talking to two of our young coaches. We have small group meetings once a month, and this semester we're talking about team cohesion. So I led with the question, we talk, and it somehow it adapted to the conversation of why did you originally get into coaching?
mhm.
And I think if I'm answering honestly, I was a coach for about a decade at the college level before administration. And the coaches that I had a big impact on me. And I wanted to have that on others. But I think at the core of it is I wanted people to look up to me like I looked up to those coaches. And there had to be this humbling process of people walking with me um, in order to change my trajectory where there was a more altruistic, less selfish motive to what I was doing. And
I think every competitor, has to face that.
yeah,
If you've been formed in competition and in the world of sport, that seems kind of like almost the default mode.
yeah. So why do you think people get into coaching now? If you work with a lot of people and interface with a lot of people, why do you think they're getting into the business?
That's a good question. I th- I think most people's why is because they love the sport.
Mm-hmm.
They identify with it, they love it, or they were raised in that world and they don't have a vision for their life outside of that world. I mean, that was me. I can only speak from
Yeah.
personal experience, really.
Yeah.
And that's I'd been a person of sports since I was 4, and now all of a sudden at 22, I'm not that anymore. That's an identity crisis
That's
for a lot
terrifying.
of
Yeah.
people. And, I have a funny I'll one funny story that actually countermands that a little bit, but I remember it was helpful at the time, though. I remember after my last college game, we I played at Northwest Missouri State University in the late 90s. We had some great teams. We'd won 2 national titles my sophomore and junior year. My senior year was the year we were supposed to win it all. And, uh, again, I mean, if we're gonna that was on paper, that would have been our best team of the 3, and we got knocked out by North Dakota State in the first round. And I remember sitting in that locker room, with a trail of tears burrowing through the dirt on my cheeks, and everyone had left. I was still sitting there in my shoulder pads, and my D coordinator comes in. Simmons, what are you doing here? I don't know what I blubbered out, but oh no, coach, I don't know what I'm doing now with my life. I don't know what I even said, but I'm sure it sounded like a big sob story. And he sits down next to me, and he puts his arm around me, and he said, well, he's like, I understand. You've been an athlete forever, and now it's over. Let me explain to you who you are now. And he goes, you are now a washed up D2 linebacker. Now get out of here and go see your family. And it was funny, and it broke the spell, and it did, redirect my emotions and everything in that moment. But that was enough to really change my trajectory to understand really my purpose in life. That came later, that came later as I had to go that coaching route for a few years and decide, is this really what I want to do?
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Talk about those years a little bit for me of when you transitioned from player to coach.
Well, what was fascinating for me was, when I first heard Jeff Duke share the 3D framework, for me, it was this aha moment because I had played for a legend. I mean, I knew it at the time, but he's literally in the College Hall of Fame now. His name's Mel Churchma. He's retired. He's been retired since 2010. But when Jeff shared 3D, it was just this, that's it. That's exactly what Coach T was. Now, one thing I like to help people think about 3D is it's a framework, but it's not an exoskeleton. It's an endoskeleton. And what I mean by that is, well, first of all, what is a framework? It is a skeletal structure that underlies a system, but a framework could be an exoskeleton like a turtle or a crab, that has this hard outer shell and boxes everything in and it's fleshed in. That is not what 3D is. 3D is an endoskeleton, like a human skeleton, right? Everyone listening to this podcast right now, they have a human skeleton that everyone pretty much looks the same, right? We got 2 femurs. Now I got to dust off all my AMP stuff back in the day. We got a mandible, and we got a.
Just go. You're already using words I don't know what they mean, so just go with it. I'll believe you.
Yeah, but we've got this human skeleton that on one level is kind of the same for everybody. Some variation between male, female, and all that, but pretty much the same. But oh my, when that's fleshed out, it's completely unique and different for everybody. And that's the way it should be. And so when I say that Coach T was a 3D coach, and this gave language to that, I don't mean that he literally did every little thing that Jeff was teaching from this. No, but the principles were all there. He understood them. And then he was able, and his staff were able to apply those in unique ways that were creative expressions of who they were. Underneath it, whether they recognized it or not, they were using the 3D framework. And so, it was fascinating to now be on the other side of those meetings, with the coaches, for example, and the intentionality that went into the relationship building. It didn't just happen. There was intentional strategies and there was conversations, and it all really started with the coaching staff. I'd say the biggest thing I learned from, that's an overstatement, but one of the big things I learned really even from Coach T was, like, as a coach, as a grad assistant, you are going to be at the 8:00 meeting every single day. Now, as a young GA, you're sitting there going, this is a waste of time. We need to be breaking down film. We had our meeting with the full staff on Monday, and now we just got to do our thing. But no, Coach T was adamant that even if it was for 5 minutes, everyone showed up, we looked at each other and we had a brief conversation. And sometimes it was nothing more than, looking around the table and saying, ready, break. Uh, but the value of but that was intentional. And those are the things I learned. He was intentional, saying, we're going to be together every day. And that's important. And the little relational strategies that we build in, the intentionality of really what we call the second and third dimension, it was all there. And when I learned about 3D in like 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, looking back, I could recognize all of it. And so that was so instructive for me to say, okay, they were able to do that in their own way, but now how can we continue to propagate those principles forward so that other people don't have to learn every lesson the hard way? The strength of that staff was you had a coach who was mentored well. He had great mentors in his life, parents, but then also the coaches. But he also had a great staff that he empowered. And, so anyway, that's kind of some of the things I learned from those early days was just the intentionality it takes to build the relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you do it. It's not difficult. It's not easy. It's simple, but it's intentional. You got to do it.
And there seems to be a piece there of you can't give away what you don't have. So there's just real, authentic character behind people that do it well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Of course, we like to say it. You can't be a tour guide to a land you haven't traveled.
There it is. I was trying to think of what I was saying. Couldn't come up with it. Tell me about. We talk about sometimes on the show the differences and similarities, coaching different genders, different sports, high school versus college. I assume you interface with all those different levels. Anything come to mind of what's absolutely the same or what's different that coaches should keep in mind?
Some people may not agree with this. I heard this years ago, and but one thing I heard was one time that kind of resonates with me. It's kind of funny. Let's see, boys have to play good to feel good. Girls have to feel good to play good. That's an overgeneralization. I do recognize that with my own kids a little bit, but I think part of that is not necessarily healthy on the guy. Let's unpack that a little bit. It's kind of a humorous way to think of it, but I think there's some truth in, as I think about the boy aspect, right? The male aspect, I got to feel good to play good. Excuse me, I got to play good to feel good. Let me get that right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to really what was instructing me as I went into coaching for the wrong reasons initially, and that's that performance-based identity. And I would point coaches that are interested in those kind of issues to resources like Joe Ehrman's Inside Out Coaching. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but he talked a lot about masculinity and the lies of masculinity, that, your masculinity is tied to what he calls the 3 Bs, the ball field, the bedroom, and the billfold. But that first one, the ball field, from a very young age, boys are taught that if I can kick the kickball further on the playground than all my classmates, I'm more of a man or whatever. And that, I think that gets perpetuated. And so really I feel like if you're coaching guys, that's probably one of the things you're going to have to work to undo in their life a little bit more, that sports are what you do. It's not who you are, and try to help them separate their identity from their performance. But females are, the ladies are just as, they're susceptible as well. But, I think that I'll just speak from my own, having a daughter. I've never coached girls sports. So I'm a little bit on, I don't want to opine on that. That's a journey I haven't, talk about being a tour guide to Atlanta.
Yeah.
My wife's coached the girls, and I have a daughter, so I have that front row seat to it. But I do think that there's, doing the team building stuff is important for everybody, but things can get pretty sideways.
Something we were talking about beforehand of just a basic concept of put-ups, which for those listening, it's a way of publicly affirming people on the team and different stuff. And I've had more than one female sport coach here at Friends where I work say, that won't work with girls. We do them in the weight room all the time. And the girls even comment in their postseason evaluations how much they love doing them. So there's these perceptions of, well, this won't work for girls, this won't work for guys. And there's some of that, but there's also some universal things of, I think people by and large appreciate being affirmed.
I agree
And
with that.
that's not a gender based thing. And
Well, and the other thing is just like, well, we train 3D all over the world. And the one thing that I mean, why I think 3D applies to everybody's because it's really not a framework for sports leadership or, male leadership, female. It's just kind of a framework for humanity. And what we find is as we train 3D around the world, even though every culture is a little bit different, the higher you go up level wise in sport, the more the culture is kind of the same everywhere,
Mhm.
boy and girl, and that's where that hyper competition begins to have similar impacts on everybody.
Mhm. What about high school versus college environments, or even throw in professional, some stuff you're doing? Um, in terms of the leadership and the 3D framework and just working with those different levels of athletes, do you think the common needs are the same? Do you adjust for different levels? Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think the higher you go up, the purpose does change of sports a little bit. I mean, obviously, when you can think in terms of a continuum of on the left hand, and if you could just imagine it, kind of a scale. Clear over here to the left, you've got kind of the play based model of sport, and over here on the very far right, you've got kind of an entertainment model. And so it's kind of the play versus power deal, right? And so the higher you go, the more really just the agreed upon purpose of it is entertainment, and it's a business. It's entertainment business is what pro sports really is, and that is, it just by default is going to become more and more transactional the higher you go, and it doesn't mean that you can't be 3D in that process. I'm just saying that the
Yeah.
systems that drive all of that kind of undermine you to a degree. Uh, So there is a difference, I think. You think about the big time Power Five level and up versus, you know, education based athletics. There's a pretty big gap there. We try to pretend like it's not there, but the reality is
Yeah.
it's harder
I
to
got
get people when money gets involved. It's just harder to get people to be to default to transformational over transactional.
Yeah, I was trying to the idealistic side of me wants to say this stuff works anywhere. And I think
Yes.
at a base it does. But I was talking to a friend of mine that's a administrator at a Power Five school, and his take was it does, but you may not have time.
That's true.
Or the coaches perceives they can't do them both and got to value one because they got to keep their job.
Well, a great example of that would be John Wooden, right? I mean, I think that if you were ever to pick a 3D coach, whether he self-identified as that or not, I think John Wooden would fit the bill. I mean, he obviously knew his X's and O's and the legacy of people that come back and talk about how much he impacted their life. I mean, it's just ever growing, right? But he didn't win a national championship until his 10th year. It took him 10 years to build a culture. And they rattled off, 12 in a row?
Yeah.
But, in today's climate, John Wooden would never have the opportunity to succeed like he did.
Yeah.
Most likely, because what you said, you got 3 years or less.
Yeah. Do you see that climate ever changing?
um, sadly, it might take some kind of martyr,
Yeah.
some kind of tragic event that really exemplifies the problem and drags it out in the light where people start rethinking it.
Hmm.
And they're there, but we still gloss over them because remember, sports builds character. But so we gloss over a lot under the mantra of sports builds character. But sadly, I don't know. I mean, we're going to need it. One of the things we talk about in 3D is the power of a Kairos moment, right? This trajectory changing moment. There's not been one of those big enough to really change the trajectory of sport yet. So hopefully that's not what
Yeah.
it takes. But if you think back to even and it may not be a sport event, but I remember 9/11 was probably one of those moments that had everyone rethinking what we're doing and all our ancillary activities and things. And sadly, sometimes I don't know, it's just like change only comes by either wisdom or crisis, and too often we just wait for the crisis.
Yeah, it's hard for me seeing change happen without a crisis because, I mean, I'm part of the problem. I'm working in the industry, but where sports is at an unhealthy level of importance in our at least in our country, and it's hard to know how that's going to turn. And I know a lot of the issues that I deal with, situations that blow up. At the core of it, it's, in my opinion, misplaced identity, and it's being threatened because of playing time, coach treatment, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, we got these interpersonal conflicts that, if we took a step back from, we could see the unhealth, but everybody's so close, it just becomes combustible.
That's a great point.
It's hard to figure out how to unwind it.
Well, I think, the answer is just doing what you're doing. You got to,
Yeah.
people just, we've got to take care of home base. And if we get enough people just taking care of home base, we all have a sphere of influence, and if we can start getting those spheres of influence to overlap, then I think that's the chance we have to impact maybe the wider culture. But the focus has just got to be, what can I control, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and that's my team, my athletic department, my family, my domain.
Mhm.
Just try to be that example.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to start with a statement, which they say not to do, and then have a question. But we talk a lot in the work we're doing about this generation of student athlete, which really kids born post 2000, but have also went through COVID during their middle school or high school years. And I think there's been some pronounced ways kids have changed,
Mhm.
understandably, with everything that we have gone through. But I think it's lazy to say, "Oh, this generation doesn't get it," because I can't imagine my parents didn't say it about my generation, and their parents didn't say about theirs. That's an age-old conversation.
Yeah.
So, curious, when you look at, and I'm holding up air quotes as I'm sitting in my office alone, this generation of athlete, so the kids in high school and college competing right now, what do you see as the keys to working with them that may be different than, say, 10 years ago?
Uh, well, first of all, I mean, these kids have grown up with a world of information at their fingertips, and they know how to get it. And so, just accepting what you say as truth as a coach may or may not, I think with this generation, as much as any other, maybe more, is they need to know the why.
Hmm.
They want to know why do it this way, and it seems to be a generation that is kind of awakened a little bit more to the ideals of pursuing purpose in life and things like that. But it is interesting to, earlier I made the comment that sports builds character, right? And we we say, how we would say that in 3D is that's a loaded question, because it depends on what kind of character you're asking about. It could be,
Agreed.
if you're talking about teamwork and commitment and sacrifice and all those types of things. I think you can make a case that sport, yes, helps build those in people. But if it's the moral side, the goodness, justice, honesty, mercy, those kind of character attributes, those actually get undermined in a competitive environment. But let's just take it at face value and say, yeah, sport builds character. Um, does it? Because we've got a generation of kids right now coming out of school that have been fully immersed in that competitive environment, more so than probably any other generation. Right? I mean, 2000 forward, the tournament models and the early competition that's been thrown out there. At some point, we do got to ask the question: are they more hardworking? Are they more teamwork oriented? Are they more committed? Are they more sacrificing? I think I don't know. If you look at the state of, the state of the workforce research, engagements as like this all-time low. So I think we just got to look at the systems that we have, and then we got to evaluate it and judge it by its fruit. Like, because I think you could make the case that kids are less competitive now than they've ever been.
Mhm.
Um, I had this conversation with an old college basketball coach. And it's like kids are exposed to so much competition that the sting of losing is really not even there anymore. I don't know if you recognize that, but kids, if they lose a game, it's like, oh well, we got one in 20 minutes.
We got another one tomorrow. Yeah.
Yep. And his perspective was, even at the college level, kids that have really been immersed in that environment, there is no sting of losing. So that's an interesting perspective. So I don't know. I mean, your question was what's different, or how do you? I think we've got to help them understand why, and that's an intrinsic motivator for this generation.
Yeah.
But um, because of the amount of competition and the constant messaging of, I think there's probably a fixed mindset that's been foisted upon this generation, maybe more than others, and a lot of that's because of the technology. And it's just like, I think athletes today are afraid of judgment.
Mhm.
It's hard. People say it's harder to coach athletes today. They don't take coaching well. Well, they live in an environment where there's always a camera on them.
Yep.
And they're one mistake away from being viral for the wrong reasons on TikTok. And if they're good, well, the judgment doesn't stop there either. And so it just seems like there's kind of maybe a fear of failure that's systemically been kind of, it's shaped them.
Mhm. I don't even know if it's real or perceived, but I think there's a life is, I mean, heck, I'm trying to learn how to use Instagram for my job and put stuff out there, my kids, all this kind of stuff. Kids that are fluent in that, it's been part of their lives as long as they remember, and they feel like they're living life on a stage. And when most people probably don't care, but since they're putting it out there, it feels like they're being watched at all times, and there's just that fear of failure. I think that's probably a very real thing.
Yeah. So helping kids overcome that, I think it's just we've got to unhitch their identity from their performance.
Yeah. And where it gets hard, I'm still simmering on the caring about losing. And so I have 4 kids. The oldest is in 4th grade, and she dances, swims, doesn't really do the competitive sport thing. We've made our kids beg to even put them in competitive sports, but there's all this dramatics going on in her grade school because they have basketball teams for the boys, then they split. They don't invite these kids to come. Then this parent gets mad and goes to another team. And I mean, maybe it's been there the whole time, and I just don't know. But even in 4th grade YMCA basketball, there's a transient nature of year to year staying on a team or not, based on winning, based on tryouts, whatever it may be. And you play that out. And if you're switching teams every 2 years, 1 year, transfer high schools a few times, you wouldn't have just the time to be invested and care of winning or loss with a specific group. I don't know. I'm trying to form a thought there. Did that make any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, parents today, I mean, I've got 4 kids. My youngest is in 2nd grade, and my oldest is a junior in high school. So we've done the youth sport thing with my oldest 2 already. And it's like, if you don't have your kid on a team by 2nd grade, there's this fear of, oh no, I'm left behind, and it's like a social Darwinism. It's like this consummate beating out of the week, replacing this kid with we got a new shortstop, but then and all of that shows up in middle school and high school with kids that have an extremely fixed mindset. And unfortunately, I think the amount of money that we're spending on youth sports as parents, these are pre-COVID numbers. I haven't looked at them recently, but this was before COVID, and I don't think it's, especially in today's economy, any lower than this. But I do think we're back to where we were. And at the time that I looked this up, it's probably like 2019. It was nearly 20% of families in America spending at least $1,000 per month per kid on youth sports. It is like 8%, almost 10%, spending $2,000 or more a month on elite travel sports. And the thing is, when you're spending that kind of money and your kid doesn't perform, it just kind of breeds a transactional environment at home.
Yeah.
You're coming home from a weekend tournament from 4 hours away, and your kid didn't play well, and yeah, mom and dad up there going, don't you know how much money we spent on these hotels and all this time, and that's all the effort we could get out of you, and kids back there going, I didn't ask for any of it.
Rather be at home watching the movie.
But all of that messaging just continues to be absorbed and interpreted as, my value is tied to my performance. When I play well, mom and dad love me more.
Mm-hmm.
That begins to shape a mindset. And even though that's likely not true in most cases, it's the reality of how it feels.
Yeah. And you can dive deeper and deeper into this, or there's, in my opinion, a spiritual element to it as well. It's just there's a lot of depth there. But I will say, I think you're an optimist by nature. I tend to lean that way. I think we're sounding negative right now. I do think there's a positive of this generation of demanding respect, to be treated like people by a coach, and wanting to know the why. I think those are inherently good things. And coaches are having to adapt, because 20 years ago, I don't think they were used to getting questioned. But from my seat now, I look at that and I can understand how it'd be annoying at times to coaches, but I think that's a really good thing. I'm glad that change is happening. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think that, you got to have answers for those questions. And if you don't, then if it's one thing to be annoyed, but it's another thing to be frustrated because they're asking questions you haven't really thought through. So it's an opportunity to think it through. And then to frame the whole money thing in a positive too. I mean, listen, just for full disclosure, I mean, we spend plenty of money on youth sports, trust me. But I think, and I'm not perfect at this myself, but at least I'm trying to grow in my understanding of why we spend money on sports, for example. And so I tell parents, I'm not saying, first of all, I mean, where your treasure is, your heart is. If you're a sports family like us, you're going to spend money. You want to do that. Those are fun things. There, in some ways, that's the best use of my money, because we're doing something as a family that we all love. But change the perspective from I'm investing in to develop my kids toward I'm giving the gift of playing sports, because that's a fundamentally different kind of mindset. When you give a gift, you don't expect a return. You shouldn't.
Yeah.
But if you're investing, by definition, you're expecting a return on that. And that's where things begin to get ugly. So continue to give your kids the gift of opportunities to play sports and things, but just,
well, as you frame that, I think of it like one of the most valuable parts of all that is the time you get in the car with your kids, driving to all these tournaments and different things. That's a lot of good uninterrupted family time.
Yes, it takes discipline, especially after the game when they played bad. But
well, let me give you the platform real quick before we wrap up. You guys have some really cool stuff going on outside of sports specific 3D Institute. Tell everybody what you're doing.
Well, we're in the midst of a 3-year project experiment. I don't know what you call it, but we had an opportunity in St. Joseph, Missouri, which is a town that is trying to come together and find a brighter future and those types of things, to really come together with the 3D framework. I mean, so we've developed out the training for the whole school district. So we have 3D for educators now, and coaches. But then we also developed it out for the business community. So we're kind of in the midst of a 3-year project to say, how can we implement this as a common leadership framework, not just for athletics, not just for the school, but for the whole community to come together and create a clarity of purpose, an alignment of effort, a common language, a shared framework, so that together we're all united in purpose and pursuing the common good of our community. So that's the Cliff Notes version of it. And anybody that's interested in that can go to, we call it the Joseph Company. That's kind of our local name of it. thejosephcompany.com is where we've chronicled all of this. And people if they're interested, they can check it out there. But that's, the Joseph Company is not a company like an LLC, but it's a company of people united in purpose. We call it a gathering for dreamers. So check that out if you want to know more about that.
Cool. And I'll put all that info in the show notes too, so people can find it easily. So,
Our goal with this lab is to now, create so now we've got all of the resources we've developed for sport coaches available for education and business as well. And so those are uh, not only they're being cooked up in the lab here of St. Joseph, but really the point is to make those available to other communities as well.
cool, cool. And as a affirmational work you guys are doing, I mean, at Friends University, we've been all in on using the 3D as a framework for all our athletic programs for the last 2 years. And we recently we have an unbelievable strength coach, and he gives a lot of presentations to recruits. We're like, you know what, we should put that in video, so he's not spending all his time doing that, and we can send it out. And so he worked with somebody to put the video together, and we just had to keep it under 5 minutes. And he spent about 30 seconds outlining how he utilizes 3D, the graphic on the lanes, and I didn't even bring it up. So it's brought unbelievable value to what we're doing.
That's good to hear.
Cool.
Our role is to be the guide. So
yeah. Cool. Well, last thing we always do on the show is we have a rapid fire round where I'm going to ask you 4 or 5 questions. You have no longer than 30 seconds to answer any of them.
Okay.
Question 1. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift, and why?
Beauty Will Save the World by Brian Zahnd, because it articulates what I believe are the 3 fundamental prime virtues that make any healthy community. Now, it's a Christian book, so it's from a faith-based perspective, but it articulates the need for truth, goodness, and beauty, and how all 3 of those work together, and they cannot really work effectively independent of each other.
Cool. I never heard of that. How has a failure or a parent failure set you up for later success?
I'm still failing all the time, so can I tell you later?
Fair enough. What's your favorite podcast other than this one?
The one I've listened to probably more than any other is Masters of Scale. It's more of a business, kind of how to scale a business, but the general leadership principles that are within that have been just lots of golden nuggets.
All right, this is the one.
Story Brand by Donald Miller.
Story Brand. This is the one I've been so interested in how you'll answer. How do you define success in your current work?
Success for us is helping other people be significant. So in other words, our definition of success is when we help other people see their definition of success as helping others succeed. So I know that's really
a lot of success in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of success, but the idea is, kind of in our view, success is something you view through the lens of self and your own self-interest, but significance is when you view your dream through the eyes of others, where their success becomes your significance. I know that's a lot of S words in success.
No, that makes sense.
But that's ultimately for us that we could become the guide for others to help. That we could become the guide for leaders in other organizations where they see their definition of success as tied to the success of their teams.
Yeah.
That wasn't very succinct, but
it makes sense and it's well said. Last one. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life? I'll read it again. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your life?
My instinct is to say, belief, for belief to be beyond mental assent, it's going to have action, right? So belief in the action of taking calculated risks in the appropriate time, in the opportune time, has been the most life-changing, and doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And doing it. I mean, this really comes from, in our training, we highlight this study that was done by 95 of 95-year-olds, and just ask them a simple question: if you could go back in time and do it all over again, what would you do differently? And the three things that dominated the responses were, number one, they would reflect more. Number two, they would risk more. And number three, they would do more things that live on after them. And I think the reflection is necessary so you know what kind of risks to take, but having the courage at the right time to take the right risks is something I'm trying to live out right here in midlife. To me, it's the first drive of the second half. So that's always the most important drive of any football game, according to my football coaches. And coach says, that's what he's looking at. I believe him, and that's what we're going for. But I think that, really, really taking those three things to heart has been pretty transformational over the last few years.
Cool. I read a book a few months ago that kind of dives into that dove into the Harvard study that interviewed people every 5 or 10 years throughout their whole life. The book's called The Good Life. And yeah, they talk a lot about relationships and
something like that.
It is, Waldinger and Schultz are the ones who wrote that. So anyways.
Very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for taking the time. Any final thoughts?
No, just an expression of appreciation to you and your team for all that you're doing for so many people in your community. We're just honored to be a small part of that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks again, Wes. We appreciate the work you do.
Have a great day.
See ya. Beyond Coaching is a podcast of the Impactful Coaching Project in partnership with Friends University. The Impactful Coaching Project seeks to develop coaches that coach the whole person. The Impactful Coaching Project is the thought leader in coaching the 21st century athlete and produces training, information, and original research to help coaches develop. For more information, check out impactfulcoachingproject.substack.com. Thank you for listening. University for their support and passion for empowering leaders. And if you have any questions for today's guest or myself, all our contact information is in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in.